you a happy, happy, happy Friday, as I like to say. But even more so, with it being World Mental Health Day, I welcome you to this platform. I hope that your morning has gone off to a great start, a relaxing start, a peaceful start. And I also want to congratulate you on taking this time and this opportunity to prioritize you, to be here for you. Thank you for doing that. I also want to thank Black female therapists for this opportunity to come onto this platform on such a significant day. I'm so happy to be a part of this conversation around burnout and boundary setting, especially because I know firsthand, both personally and professionally, how it does indeed affect our mental health and wellness in a great way. And so my name is Mariah Holland. I am a licensed professional counselor. Most people are familiar with mental health therapists. I'm excited to say that I do have a virtual private practice. It's been in business for over 2 years, and it is entitled Empowered Counseling Services, LLC. A little play on words. It actually starts with an M instead of an E. That's Empowered with an M, Powered Counseling Services, LLC. And so if anyone wanted to reach out, learn a bit more about me, my approach, anything that I do, feel free to visit my website. You can visit www.empowered, again, starts with an M, Empowered Counseling Services, LLC.info. That is a great place to reach out to me, learn more about me, what I do, as well as connect with me. And so I would be excited to be able to support you in any way, shape, or form that I can. And so let's jump on in. I would love to start with burnout. That can be a very, very heavy topic. I'm going to go ahead and just put it out there. And so for those of you joining today, I highly, highly encourage you to be gentle with yourself. For some people, talking about this topic can be a little bit triggering, especially if you're currently experiencing burnout. And so we're going to talk a little bit about what burnout is, what it looks like, and some ways that we can prevent that, as well as tie it into boundary setting. And so go ahead and settle in. If you're listening, settle in. If you need to breathe, breathe. If you need to pause, pause. I want to give you that validation. And so what is burnout? Burnout is the mental, emotional, and physical experience of exhaustion. It usually comes from chronic stress, so being stressed out all the time, okay, and either lacking or having inconsistent boundary setting. And we'll talk a little bit more about that a little bit later. But one of the things I want to point out to you all is that burnout can look a lot like depression. You may experience things such as a disinterest in things that would normally please or excite you. You may notice a decrease in motivation, productivity, or efficiency, right? So you may slow down a little bit, may not do things as quickly as you normally would, even though there's everyday tasks. You may experience increased irritability. You may have some forgetfulness. The big one here is exhaustion or chronic fatigue. You may describe it as a feeling of being drained, depleted, as if you have little to no energy to do much of anything. A lot of people experience cynicism, which is basically having a negative attitude towards maybe work, maybe it's others in your family, friends, maybe it's colleagues, maybe even clients if you're seeing clients. Some people that I've worked with have also described it as having kind of like a I don't care attitude. And so I want to validate all of those things. Burnout can look like this. And one of the things that I also want to say is, no, you are not lazy. I've heard this time and time again working with various clients, whether they are experiencing depression itself or if they are experiencing burnout and don't quite know what it is, what it looks like, what to look for. And so sometimes they may hear from others, such as like their significant other, family, friends, colleagues, and others, they may hear that word lazy, and so I'm here to tell you that you're not. you're not lazy. You're likely just experiencing a little bit of burnout, maybe a lot of burnout. One of the things that also comes to my mind while we're on this is that, when it comes to experiencing burnout, our bodies just have a way of letting us know when we're tired. That's what it is. It's our bodies, our minds, and our emotional way of letting us know we are tired. And so I want to normalize this a bit, especially for those of you who may be in a health profession like myself, particularly with other therapists, but anyone in the human service profession especially. We often, experience kind of an enmeshment or overlap when it comes to what we do and who we are, what our values are, our personality type. And so because there's this strong connection between who we are personally and a lot of times, again, especially if you're in a human service field, who we are professionally, it makes us a little bit more susceptible to burnout, whether that's personally, emotionally, mentally. And so it's easy to kind of fall into situations where boundaries get crossed. One of the things that comes to my mind, just on a personal note, where I experienced a little bit of burnout, and a lot of times it'll kind of sneak up on you. I will say that. I experienced that firsthand. I was, kind of new coming into the profession, so we're talking some years ago. But, I remember being so passionate about what it is that I was doing. I was working with women, doing trauma work, which can be very, very heavy, let me just say, both for the client that's experiencing it and as well as the therapist if you're not careful, right? And so I was very passionate about what I was doing. And, unfortunately, there were other situations that was happening on the job where, the organization, some of the things that they were doing wasn't necessarily in alignment with what I valued and what I saw, was important in our work with clients. And on top of that, I was experiencing some personal, stress. I had some things going on with my mom, and, she lived far away, so that was going on personally. I was newly married, and so, there's that. And then on top of that, literally, as I would have a client session and then they would leave, I would have a coworker come into my room, and then they were pouring on to me. And so at some point, I didn't realize, in my mind, I was okay. I was, fairly well. I can handle all of these things that was happening and other people's stuff, and I can still be okay. That's what I told myself. At some point, my body just kind of gave out. I found myself exhausted, not just physically, but emotionally. I felt like, my tolerance was a little different. I found myself sometimes, being a little off when I was sitting with clients. I noticed my mind would wander a little bit more, right? And so I'm here to say to you that, if you are experiencing burnout, if you have experienced burnout, know that you are human. You are human. I'm a whole therapist, a whole human, a whole mom, a whole, wife, all of the things, all of these things, life experience and all. But guess what? I'm still human. So I am still susceptible to experiencing burnout, to experiencing stress, But I also want to point out that what I learned personally and professionally is that it's also preventable. Burnout is preventable, y'all. And so one of the other things that I think is important to mention, oftentimes we think of burnout in an occupational context, right, where it can be caused by, let's say, heavy workloads and long hours on the job. It can be perceived or actual lack of control or autonomy in the workplace, right? Oftentimes we hear about the unhealthy work-life balance, which work-life balance, that's a whole other topic. But, maybe it's feeling unsupported by supervisors, colleagues, right? But one of the things that I want to point out, and I think this is very important, is that you can experience burnout even within, let's say, home, right? So what comes to my mind is, maybe a stay-at-home mom, stay-at-home wife. I consider it to be a high risk of burnout if at any point you're investing so much of your time, energy, efforts, etc., into any place, anything or any person to a point that your needs and wants are always on the back burner and you feel unable to cope, manage, or practice self-care. So I think that's important to point out. For some people, it may not be necessarily on their job per se, right? And so I think that's important in case you're someone that's experiencing burnout in a different kind of way. So going back to the point I made earlier, burnout is definitely preventable. It's preventable. I had to kind of learn the hard way, and I think most people do, right? You get to that place, where you're feeling all the things, you're exhausted, or maybe you get to the place where you don't feel anything because burnout is just so severe for you. And so sometimes it can feel like it's inevitable. I used to think that for a long time, especially being in a human service field, especially doing trauma work at the time. However, one of the things that I learned is that it actually is preventable. There are things that we can do to prevent burnout. And if you are currently experiencing burnout, there are things you can do to get out of that space. It's possible, y'all. It's possible. So one of the ways that you can decrease the likelihood of burnout is, guess what? Boundary setting. And so what I want to emphasize here, is that a lot of times the people that I'm working with, they talk about their struggles with setting boundaries. And I want to, mention here that just like with burnout and how you experience it emotionally, mentally, and physically, the same applies when it comes to boundaries. Boundaries are important, not just with physically, let's say, using as an example, leaving work, but also emotionally and mentally, right? Just tying it back into the personal experience I had, one of the biggest red flags for me that I was in a space of burnout was I would come home physically, right? Left work physically. But when I would come home, I was still thinking about my clients. I was still thinking about the things that they were going through. And it got to a place where mentally and emotionally it drained me. It was hard to be present, as a newlywed with my husband because I was so busy stressing about work, thinking about my coworkers and the things that they shared with me, the things that were going on at the job. And so those were red flags for me, right, where emotionally and mentally I wasn't able to cut off the things that were happening at a place that I was no longer at, okay? And so I want to point that out. So let's talk about what boundaries are. So one of the definitions that I saw recently, and I really liked it, is that boundaries are the personal limits and rules we set to define what is acceptable in our physical, emotional, and mental space. Another way that I've defined it recently, and I actually shared this on my LinkedIn, when it comes to healthy boundaries are where your life decisions, wants, needs, and your control ends, and where others' life decisions, wants, needs, and control begins. And so I want you to keep this in mind as we continue to talk a little bit more. One of the things that also came to my mind when it comes to boundaries is that boundaries are expressed in just about everything we do, even when it's unintentional, right? So most people say that they struggle with boundary setting, and I've even said it, at some point or another. But again, what I've learned both personally and professionally is that even when we think we're not setting a boundary, maybe we don't feel like we're intentionally choosing to set this boundary or that boundary, unintentionally we're still communicating a boundary. So even when I'm not setting a boundary, telling someone what it is that I want, that I need, etc., when I think that, I'm not doing that, I'm still communicating a boundary to them. So it may not be the boundary we want to communicate with them, but I'm still communicating a boundary. And so, keeping in mind that as we set boundaries, we want to be very intentional about them, right? So, of course, keeping in mind, we're not talking about in the context of assault, when our boundaries become violated. But we're talking about, in terms of maybe when we struggle to set and enforce boundaries in relation to our partners, and significant family members, like a parent, when you're an adult, and maybe we are feeling overextended in all of our tasks or what they've asked of us, and that turns into frustration and resentment towards them because we think they should know better. I've been there. I have felt that before. But we have not communicated to them, you know, what our boundaries are, what our needs are, what our wants are. But again, in some way, we are communicating it to them. It's just not in the way that we want, right? So if we allow things to happen, we, you know, overextend ourselves without asking, hey, can you help me? Then we're communicating to them that we don't need help, right? So in a sense, we're communicating a boundary. It's just not maybe the healthiest boundary. So keep that in mind. So why are boundaries important? I like to think of boundary setting as a form of self-care, and my favorite way to say self-care is self-love. Think about that common phrase we've likely all heard at one point regarding not being able to pour from an empty cup. I recently shared in an article, actually, that you can pour, technically you can, from an empty cup. Many of us either have or still do, but the quality of that pour won't be so great. Okay? Emphasis on the quality. I think about the gas in my car. I notice that when I have a full tank, my car drives smoother. The gas gets utilized seemingly evenly and fairly through my drives. The math is mathing. And sometimes I even notice the amount of miles the GPS says I go is less than the amount of miles my car says it went when it comes to my gas utilization. However, when I get low on gas, I notice the gas goes quicker. So, for an example, if my GPS says I'm driving 10 miles to get to my destination, I notice when my gas is low, it might take 20 miles of my gas. Anybody been there? I have been there, okay? So I'm giving this example. But ironically, it didn't do this when my gas tank was full. When it was full, y'all, sometimes it would say that it would take me 10 miles to get there, and I only use 7. But when my gas is low, if that thing say 50 miles or less, okay, and my destination says it's supposed to be 10 miles, I'm probably going to use about 20. So it takes more gas, right? My point is, it's the same way when your emotional, mental, social, and physical tank, if you will, or capacity is low and hasn't been refueled. Think you putting more gas in your car. Or preserved. Think you allowing your car just to sit for the day and not be used. When your capacity is on E, you may be able to still squeeze out fuel and even accomplish things, but you will likely notice your tolerance for any kind of stress or trigger is low, or even your energy gets drained easier, right? So think about that irritability feeling. Boundaries help us build up resilience or fuel up, if you will, so that we can keep driving smoothly. Boundaries preserve the energy we have left after a long day of work or with family and or friends. Boundaries allow for us to take a break and take stock of our mental, emotional, social, and physical reserves. Boundaries help us to notice, prioritize, and care for ourselves so that our output is quality. Remember, I said emphasis on quality, y'all. Intentionality, and that it gets us to where we need to go next in our mental, emotional, social, and physical health. Boundaries help us to go further or evolve in every facet of our lives and helps us to be fair and equal in our treatment of others. Boundaries helps not only our mood, y'all, but our confidence and our ability to do things we set out to do. So the more you set boundaries, the more confident you become, the more you trust yourself. I want to take a moment to do a little bit of a grounding activity. I think this will help tie things together a little bit when it comes to burnout as well as boundary setting. And then I want to give you guys a few resources before we close out today. So I would like for you to get as comfortable as you can. And take a nice deep breath. If you feel comfortable, go ahead and close your eyes. I want you to think of the last time you felt like you were burnt out. Or if you're experiencing that now, I want you to hold space for it. If you're not experiencing burnout, but you're feeling unheard, unvalued due to struggles with boundary setting, try not to judge or criticize yourself for it. Just notice what comes up for you. Maybe it's resentment or frustration about work. Maybe it's about resentment and frustration about your spouse or family member. Hold space for that. Maybe it's sadness and disappointment because you expected things to be different. Your feelings are valid. Say to yourself, my feelings are valid. My feelings are valid. I'm feeling this way, and that's okay for me right now. We're showing ourselves some love right now. So maybe you want to wrap your arms around yourself and give yourself a hug. Maybe you want to hold your hand over your heart and say something like, everyone feels this way sometimes. May I be kind to myself in this moment. Then I want you to take another deep breath and ask yourself, how do I want to feel? Because the thing is, we may not be able to control our initial feelings and thoughts, but research shows that initial, feelings naturally last about 90 seconds, which means we get to choose after that whether we want to hold on to them. So I ask again, how do you want to feel? Is it confident, assertive, more at peace, relaxed, calm? Now I want you to ask yourself, what do I need to do to experience these feelings instead? Maybe it's meditating or deep breathing more so that you feel more emotionally regulated. Maybe it's having a tough conversation with someone you love or your supervisor about what you need and want or expect from them when you're feeling a bit more grounded in yourself and know these things, right? And that's important when you're communicating, right? Awareness of yourself. Now I want you to take another deep breath. And we're going to give ourselves a little encouragement and affirmation now. This is a good time to maybe say your favorite encouraging quote if you have one, or you may say something like, here's some suggestions. My time and energy is precious, and I can choose at any time I want to honor that. Maybe you'll say something like, I am feeling a bit worn out right now, but I don't have to stay here. I can choose to take action anytime I want towards a healthier me. Now I want you to take one last deep breath. Let that thing out, y'all. And when you're ready, maybe do some small gestures to come back into the room. Show yourself some gratitude for showing up for you, taking this moment. Wiggle your toes and or fingers. And if your eyes were closed, you can go ahead and open your eyes. I want to remind you all of something. Boundaries are unique to you, right? Boundaries are essentially self-care, self-love. And so the reason why I'm not giving a whole long list of ways you can set boundaries is because only you know what that looks like for you, because it's unique to you. And so I want to encourage you to ask yourself, what is it that you need? What is it that you want? and how can you take action towards meeting those needs and wants? Some journal prompts for later that I thought might be useful for you after today or later on. You can ask yourself something like, where in your life do you notice yourself saying yes when you really mean no? I'll repeat that question again in case you're writing it down. Where in your life do you notice yourself saying yes when you really mean no? Another question you might ask, in your journal prompts, if you're journaling later or reflecting later, what would protecting your energy look like this week? Let's focus that a little bit. What would protecting your energy look like this week? Maybe you can identify one emotional, one physical, and one time boundary that you want to strengthen. The more specific you are, the more likely you are to do it. We know that about goal setting, right? And so I want to just throw a little recommendation out there as far as a book. I read this book. I recommend it to literally all my clients, even friends and colleagues of mine. I just think it's an awesome book. It is a book entitled Set Boundaries, Find Peace. Again, that's Set Boundaries, Find Peace, and it is by Nidra Tawwab. Her last name is spelled Tawwaab. First name Nidra. The book is amazing, y'all. It's a great book. So if you're trying to practice boundaries a little bit more, get a deeper or specific understanding of what boundaries looks like, she gives great examples and even, touches on assertive communication with what that looks like with boundary setting. And so just a quote real quick that I just want to share with you all. It's one of my favorite quotes because, again, to me, boundary setting is self-care and self-love. And so this quote, you may have heard it before, and I actually have it on my Psychology Today page because it's just that great. And the quote is, caring for myself is not self-indulgence. It is self-preservation. And that is an act of political warfare. That was said by Audre Lorde. So I hope that this information in some way, shape, or form has helped you all on today. Again, feel free to check out my website. I do have a YouTube channel. One of my passions is particularly supporting and just, shining a light on, like, the struggles of Black women in particular. And so my YouTube channel is dedicated specifically for that. But on my website, I have a host of resources and things. It's the greatest way really to connect with me and learn more about me and what I do. I do have a LinkedIn page. I can also be found on many popular therapist directory platforms such as Black Female Therapists, Psychology Today, Therapy for Black Girls, and more. Feel free to send me a message or an email, and I'd be happy to find ways to support you. If you're struggling with what we talked about or anything pertaining to mental health, remember, your mental health matters. Thank you all for listening.
Thank you, everyone, so much. Thank you, everyone, so much for joining us. And that was such an awesome talk. I mean, I got so many jewels out of it myself, and even just taking the time to hold space for what I am feeling right now. So that was amazing. If you guys have any questions, please send them over. You can send them through our social media platforms, or you can email them to us at hello@blackfemaletherapist. Or if you have, you want more information about getting linked up or sending questions for her to answer for you in particular, then again, send those questions there. We're going to continue on with our hotline for today during World Mental Health Awareness Day. Our next topic comes up at 11 o'clock. With Dr. Ernisha. So if you are interested in being a part of that, then call back in about 30 minutes, and we'll go at it again. Thank you, everyone, for joining, and we'll talk to you soon.